Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, a teenager finds his voice through the power of Bruce Springsteen's music in Blinded by the Light. Set in 1987, Javed, played by Vivek Kaura, lives with his Pakistani family in Luton amidst the uncertainty and tension of Thatcher's Britain. When his schoolmate Roops, played by Aaron Pagura, lends Javed his prized Bruce Springsteen cassettes, Javed becomes a devoted fan and is inspired by the lyrics, follow his dream of becoming a writer and get out of Luton, finding love with political activist Eliza, played by Nell Williams. But Javed's ambitions put him into conflict with his traditionalist father, Malik, played by Kavinder Gier, who doesn't approve of his newfound obsessions. Blinded by a Light is inspired by the teenage years of journalist and Bruce Springsteen superfan Safraz Manzoor, who's adapting his own memoir to the screen, Greetings from Bury Park, and this is a heavily fictionalised version of his life, but Javed is very much based on Manzoor. They both grew up in Luton and they became massive fans of the singer. Manzoor has seen Springsteen in concert over 100 times. Manzoor approached Gurinder Chadha with the intention of turning it into a feel-good story. Chadha's best known for her international successes like Bend It Like Beckham and Bride and Prejudice, and this very much fits the mould of her films. This is something that she's been working with Manzoor for over a decade, and eventually it got the green light once it got script approval from the boss himself. Unfortunately, it has arrived in a very crowded marketplace. We've been deluged with films based around pop music, either biopics in the form of Bohemian Rhapsody and Queen, or Rocket Man with Elton John, or simply movies inspired by pop music like this one, The Beatles and Yesterday, and the forthcoming Last Christmas, which is based on the songs of George Michael. So that does take away some of the novelty of this film, which is unfortunate, but I do think that this is the little movie that really could. I actually like this a lot more than some of those other ones. I don't think it's my favourite out of all of these, but I do think that coming out of this film, it really does have a genuine beating heart to it, and I think it's actually an irresistible movie. There's a lot of 80s flashback in pop culture at the moment, especially in terms of the media that came out then, and you have filmmakers either setting their films in the 80s or trying to invoke the feelings of the classic films made during that time, and the problem that I can sometimes have with that is that it can seem like a hollow, empty pastiche, because often the filmmakers are just saying, hey, do you recognise these popular things that came out then? Do you recognise them? And that just feels like it's totally divorced from the context that it was created in the first place. And Blinded by a Light separates itself from the pack by focusing more on the social and political atmosphere of the time, and in that way feels a lot more representative of the 80s. It's not simply looking at with nostalgia goggles. Yes, the 80s gave us a lot of great media at the time, but it was also a moment of great social and political upheaval. It was very uncertain, to say the least, especially if you were living in Thatcher's Britain, where they were cutting back on industrial industries, people were losing their jobs, you had the Cold War in the background, there was paranoia about that, and also you had hatred and prejudice rising up to the surface, especially because you had the National Front at the time. And if this all sounds very, very familiar, then that's exactly the point. The 80s setting in Blinded by a Light is meant to represent those modern day struggles, and it's really unfortunate because it reminds you that all these things that were fought for back then, we're still having to fight for in the present. And so Blinded by a Light definitely tries to make sure that you know about the contemporary parallels that it's trying to evoke. And when you have all those pressures and anxieties bearing down upon you constantly, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by it, to just feel lost, and to a certain extent hopeless. And that's how Javed feels at the beginning of this film. He feels stifled by his hometown. He doesn't know what to do with himself, and also he's afraid of the world that he's about to step into. And then Bruce Springsteen enters into his life, and suddenly he finds a path. And it's a very curious unusual relationship, at least at first glance, because Bruce Springsteen's Americana that he sings about in his music is literally a world away from a British Asian teenager growing up in Luton. But what Blinded by a Light argues is that in Springsteen's lyrics, what he writes about is so universal that it completely transcends place and time. Those feelings are things that we all feel, that we all share, and that's incredibly powerful. And that's what Javid especially responds to when he listens to it, as we do with any good piece of music. It suddenly speaks for something that has been repressed inside him for so long. Suddenly he feels like someone understands, someone recognises exactly the same struggles. It may not be the exact same details. It may not be that someone is viewing things from the exact same vantage point as you are, but it doesn't matter because it speaks to the same truths. And Chada represents that in terrifically visual fashion with the sequence where Javid listens to Springsteen for the first time, specifically Dancing in the Dark, which is set against the notorious hurricane that hit Britain that year. In case you're wondering, the infamous Michael Fish weather broadcast does make its way into the film, but set against that backdrop, it becomes this enormous element of catharsis, as if everything that Javid had been bottling up inside, everything that he'd internalised, was suddenly all released at once, and that externalisation becomes an aesthetic, especially in the way that the lyrics swirl around his head and are projected onto the garage doors as he walks past them, and the walls as he stands in front of them. And when you get lyrics saying things like, "I want to tear this city apart," it almost feels like the depth of Javid's feelings might tear Luton asunder, especially with the billowing winds. It becomes this incredibly transformative experience. And Chada, I think, really understands how much music relates on an emotional level and does her absolute best at trying to convey that visually. And while this isn't an out-and-out musical, there are definitely sequences in this film that do have that kind of aesthetic, where suddenly a Springsteen song will play and characters will burst out dancing to it. And those moments, at their best, do have the feelings of an 80s music video, something from that time period, that kind of energy, but there's also a youthfulness at the same time. And I think there is a genuine sense of passion all the way through this project. If you are a Springsteen fan, it's definitely one you want to see, because there is a whole host of its tunes on the soundtrack, especially some fairly rare tracks. Most notably, Blinded by Light actually uses a song that was recorded for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but was unused. But this isn't one of those movies that simply wallpapers popular music and hopes to get by on that. I think it really does work on its own merits with the music, not simply because they used it. And it's very easy to be sniffy about this movie because it's so sincere in its convictions. You can very cynically try to oversimplify it by saying something like, "Oh, Bruce Springsteen solves racism." Except that's not what the movie is trying to say, and obviously he doesn't. What Springsteen's music offers to Javid is a salvation, a respite from the rest of the world, and listening to his words, Javid begins to understand the power and impact they can have, and makes him want to be a writer. He wants to pursue that as a career path. And so Springsteen's voice helps Javid find his own. He finds a way of asserting himself through his writing to be a force for positive change, to do the good in the world that he wants to see. And that's cemented by his relationship with Eliza, played by Nell Williams, who is a very outspoken, left-leaning political activist. And one of the funniest scenes in the film is a moment where she takes Javid back to her parents, who are very conservative, assertive and trip over themselves, getting extremely flustered as they try to have a conversation with him, which in turn also expands upon a theme that runs all throughout this film of division between parents and their offspring, sometimes on a political opinion, but in just general viewpoint. And the movie's not trying to imply that all you need is Springsteen. Far from it. The movie acknowledges that even at the time, Springsteen was not exactly the coolest person to listen to. As one character puts it, that's what your dad listens to, while also getting a knowing chuckle out of name-checking the more popular 80s teen acts of the time like Debbie Gibson, aware of just how well those have aged, and there are definitely characters that are quite concerned for Javid's Springsteen obsession and just how much he wants to emulate his idol, be it cutting up his clothes or getting a very denim-heavy wardrobe. And yeah, the movie does kind of imply he might be overdoing it somewhat, but it's a start. And basically, the film is trying to do the same thing for us as an audience as Springsteen's music, in that it's trying to do something universal. There's a lot of coming-of-age themes in Blinded by the Light, and you take away the more specific elements of it, and you realise that there is so much to relate here. Obviously, Javid's story isn't my own, but I resonated and connected with it a lot because I feel like I felt many of those same things, if not necessarily from this perspective. And that's what Chana does so well with so many of her films. This is very much on a lot of the same ground as her earlier movie, Bend It Like Beckham. One sequence that I found particularly fascinating is a sequence where the Asian children actually go out in the daytime to party. They have a daytimer, as they call it, because they're not allowed out at night. And I just found it fascinating, a piece of cultural identity, that they're celebrating it even whilst they're rebelling. Although I do think that Javid putting on his earphones and listening to Springsteen in the midst of it is a bit of a clanger that reads a little bit too much like he's rejecting it. A lot of the charm of this movie isn't simply from the music, it comes from the cast, even in the smallest roles. For example, Rob Bryan turns up for a handful of scenes with a mullet as a market stall owner who gives Javid a job, and he's quite funny in relatively brief appearances. Likewise, Hay Atwell is very well cast as a teacher who helps encourage and nurture Javid's writing ability. Again, that's a fairly small role, but she makes a big impact. But the real heart of this film is the performances of Vivek Kaura and Kavinder Gier as father and son, and they're actually re-teamed together with Chada because she worked with them on the recent TV series she did, Beecham House. And they really do work very well together, especially as they replicate the dynamic that Manzoor had with his own father. There's something very poignant and touching about it, especially because it's very sympathetically portrayed on the part of the patriarch, in that he has just lost his job at the beginning of the film. He has worked in that factory for years and years and years, and now he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's going around from job centre to job centre, and suddenly he finds that he cannot control his family. He feels like he's losing his grip to a certain extent and not really paying his part, and he feels guilty and responsible for that. And I think the film, by adding that element to that relationship, you get an understanding of why he might be quite hard and quite difficult, but there's also a part of him that worries that his son won't be accepted, that he'll be shunned no matter what. They have to be insular, and his son wants to push back against that. He's aware that times are changing, that there are things that are going to open up for him, and that he's not going to spend his life like his father did, working in a factory. That's not what he wants. And his father just simply doesn't understand it. He doesn't recognise writing as being a legitimate profession and is deeply distrustful of the Springsteen influence. And the film tries to argue that that generational divide is part of growing up, that after a certain point you have to make your case for going out and doing things in a very different way to those that came before you. So his father butted heads with his father over his decision to go to England to make a new life. And so what happens is that father and son eventually come to see things from each other's point of view, that they realise that there is no point trying to sow a division between each other when there is much more worth in just trying to find reconciliation. And I think that there's something really poignant and affecting, especially about the way this film concludes. I really loved Blinded by the Light. I thought it was a great big hug of a film that's just so warm and inclusive in its embrace and totally unabashed about what it is. Frankly, it's the kind of film that we need right now. A movie that says, yes, there are dark times and occasionally doesn't shy away from showing that, but also says, so long as you remember that you have power, you have influence in speaking up, there is still hope, and that bears reiterating. I came out of this movie really feeling uplifted by it, and frankly I recommend it to anyone who has a lonely heart at this present moment. It's a movie that says, you feel those things, and I recognise them because I feel exactly the same way. And in terms of Bruce Springsteen's music, it's a great time listening to those in the cinema, and I think it will win over plenty of new converts over to that cause. Blinded by the Light is a hugely enjoyable crowd pleaser regardless of whether you're familiar with Bruce Springsteen's music or not. The film is a testament to the power of songs and media to connect with people because of the universal truths within them that go beyond the barriers of their creation, just as the movie itself does the same by portraying coming-of-age tropes from a different view. Gurinder Chadha's direction captures the anxieties and exuberance of youth backed by the infectious soundtrack of The Boss in a way that is rousing and uplifting, but also doesn't use the 80s setting for empty nostalgia, playing out the modern-day parallels that are all too relevant. Even as it touches on themes of prejudice and hardship, there's a genuine warmth to the film, especially with the way it depicts its father-son relationship that is joyous, inclusive and poignant, and will leave you humming the tunes with your spirits raised, ready to take on the world. If you like this review, then tune your radio over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.